SuperTalk Mississippi media production. Middays with Gerard Gibert is on the air. Middays with Gerard Gibert is powered by C-Spire. Power your home or business with C-Spire Fiber. To learn more, visit supertalk.fm/C-Spire. C-Spire Fiber powers SuperTalk Mississippi. Get ready to go beyond the headlines and join a meaningful conversation with people from around the state. You're listening to Middays with Gerard Gibert here on SuperTalk Mississippi.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Midday SuperTalk Mississippi. I'm your host, Gerard Gibert, along with Rhino in the Element Wealth Studio, guiding you through the middle of your day with facts, fodder, and fine music. Morning there, Rhino, on this
Hump Day.
All right, man, we've made it to the middle of the week, and we've survived at least a week of them wily legislators being down there underneath the dome, the Mississippi State Capitol. This would be the mark, I guess, 1 week and a day of being in session. Deadline for general bills Monday, the 19th. But all eyes are on the Mississippi House of Representatives because it is expected that HB 2, the Speaker's top priority, which would implement robust school choice in the state of Mississippi and also incorporates a number of other education reforms. I believe they're going to take that up in committee today, is my understanding, Rhino, and then perhaps put it on the floor tomorrow. That could be a marathon if it gets out of committee. I think it's expected to do so. Put it on the floor in the Mississippi House. I'm not a betting person. I'm not betting.
Maybe already in committee.
Okay.
The schedule has the House Education Committee meeting at 9 o'clock.
All right. So that could be going on right now. I knew that today was the day. But you're looking at the schedule there. It appears that would be Representative Rob Robertson, who chairs the Education Committee. He's got them all gathered up. And they're, I'm quite sure, are talking about HB 2, a sweeping bill, some 500-plus pages. And, man, the folks, as you know, are coming out of the old woodwork. Call your legislator, especially the opponents. They are quite vocal, as you well know, and they want to see this thing just crash and burn as they have for a long time. And as we've pointed out, many are the same people who also opposed the education reforms passed several years ago that have dramatically improved education outcomes in the state of Mississippi in the K through 12 and has gotten national attention, as a matter of fact. But they want to oppose this. These are also, by the way, Rhino, you remember this, the same people who supported a ballot measure back when we could do that sort of stuff that would have conferred power to a judge in Hinds County to control and dictate to the legislature education spending. They literally wanted to vest all of that power in one single judge in Hinds County. Now, fortunately, that was it Initiative 42, you recall, Rhino? That was before me and you started working together, but I believe it was 42. And that thing, it went down. It did not pass. Thank goodness. That would have been terrible policy to place such power in the hands of a single judge. These same people, by the way, are now voicing their opposition to this education choice legislation that the Speaker is advocating for, and numerous other members of the House for sure. I just don't know what to think at this point, whether or not that measure will pass. No doubt the Speaker has been hyper-focused on that legislation, and it didn't just start since the session kicked off. He's been promoting it for quite some time. And, of course, there have been attempts in the past to get something done here. Last year in the House, a bill that would have implemented phased-in universal school choice ultimately didn't even get put on the floor in committee, right? I think the chairman, Rob Robertson, said, yeah, the votes aren't there. We're not going to deal with that this year. However, there was a portability bill. Portability simply means that a student enrolled in a public school could transfer to another public school without requiring the consent of the school to which they are assigned. Their home school, that was Representative Jansen Owen from the Hattiesburg area, the author of that legislation. That did, in fact, pass the House last year. Just a little history. And then, of course, it went down to the Senate, where it was promptly disposed of by Senator DeBar. Now, I didn't catch the interview this morning, Rhino. Apparently, he was on with Richard Cross. Senator DeBar, he chairs the Education Committee in the Senate. We still have an invitation outstanding to him to join MidDays. Hopefully that will happen. I'm pleased to see at least he came on one of the programs. I didn't catch it, was busy prepping and dealing with other things. So I'm not sure. I don't. He has been on the record here recently. You recall, Rhino, where he said, I will not support any sort of program that would allow a parent to utilize the funds assigned to their child as a K through 12 student to cover the cost of private school tuition up to the amount the state appropriates for that child. So that pretty much tells you right there that should HB 2 pass the Mississippi House, it is destined for the old File 13 in the Senate. Unless they would mark it up and then send it back to conference, that would be a bit of a change from what's happened in the past, where it has just been pocket vetoed, as the saying goes. So, but that's the big thing going down there in the Capitol at this point. There are other measures, of course, but this one seems to be kind of taking all the air out of the chamber, as they say. Some other stuff's going on, not quite as high profile and sweeping in nature. I'm still hoping somebody's out there listening, and I've had private conversations with the legislators to file legislation that would align state tax policy with federal tax policy vis-a-vis the deductibility of premium overtime tips, automobile interest. These are provisions enacted in the One Big Beautiful Bill, also known as the Working Families Tax Cut. Of course, that went down last summer, retroactive to 2025. And those provisions would not be applicable in the state of Mississippi for income tax purposes unless our legislature passes law to allow those deductions above the line, meaning you could deduct them off your income before you apply the standard deduction on your state taxes. So I'm calling for an alignment there so that Mississippians can not only receive the benefit of those deductions with respect to their federal income taxes, but also as it relates to their state income taxes. That requires action on the part of our legislature to get that done. So hopefully they will. I think it's something that makes sense for Mississippians. What else are you tracking, Rhino, down? And you told us yesterday about a couple of bills related to restoration of the ballot measure. One of those, very straightforward. It was just a constitutional amendment, right, filed by Representative William Tracy Arnold. The first thing we got to do, right, is fix the Constitution.
Yeah, concurrent resolution,
Okay.
HCR 3.
Okay. And so the process there, remind me of that has to pass the legislature 2/3 vote. Is that right? And then referred to the ballot for the people to ratify. That would change the Constitution, pave the way for a ballot initiative so that the people could refer measures to the ballot box. Folks would vote on it, and I think the interest there in any new procedure in mechanics would be, well, let's don't amend the Constitution, but rather let's allow the people to vote on these measures to amend or create law with certain restrictions. We'll see where that goes as well. And then the mobile sports betting, another high-profile issue. But coming up next, it's Mississippi Congressman Michael Guest, represents the 3rd District. Stay with us, coming right back in the Element Wealth Studio. This segment of Middays with Gerard Gibert is brought to you by Covington County Hospital in Collins, where your health matters.
The talk that keeps Mississippi talking.
We're rolling. Hit it. Go. Play it.
Middays with Gerard Gibert on SuperTalk Mississippi.
Welcome back, everyone. It's Middays from the Element Wealth Studio. We're pleased to welcome now a Mississippi congressman who represents our 3rd District. It's Congressman Michael Guest. Representative Guest, thanks for joining us this morning.
Gerard, always great to talk to you.
Yeah, man, absolutely. So I caught you a couple of times over the break. You guys are back and settled in Washington there. You got a busy calendar. What's kind of your high priorities right now?
Well, there are a number of things, Gerard, that we are kind of juggling all at the same time. Appropriations bills. We know that the CR that Congress passed late last year extended the appropriations process through the end of January. We were able to pass 3 of our 12 appropriations bills as a part of that CR, leaving 9. Last week, the House passed 3 additional appropriations bills. Those have been sent to the Senate. Those appropriations bills passed with bipartisan support. This week, we have 2 more appropriations bills that will be coming to the floor this week. Those include what's called state and foreign ops, as well as our financial services. I would tell you that those 2 bills actually cut spending. The 3 bills that we passed last week cut spending. And so Republicans are working hard to pass appropriations bills that keep spending either level spending in most cases or actually cutting spending. In the state and foreign ops bill, we actually cut spending by 16% over what Congress appropriated last fiscal year. So that is Republicans working to be financially conservative in the legislation that we're passing. And then we'll have 4 more appropriations bills that we expect to hit the floor next week. That will be defense, labor H, homeland security. And then the 4th bill is going to come to me in just a minute, but would be transportation. So those will be the 4 bills that we will have put together as a package to get to the floor next week. If we can get those bills passed, then we will have passed all 12 appropriations bills. And so that is kind of the focus of Congress between now and the end of the month. But there's so much going on, Gerard. There's great economic news that we've seen. We've got the Supreme Court has been extremely busy with cases that they are hearing and opinions that we expect to come down. We have events happening in foreign policy. We've got health care. And so Congress, just like things in the Mississippi legislature, as things are extremely busy, as our state legislature comes back into session, we've got a lot of things that we're working on, a lot of things that are going on here that we are a part of, and things that we are monitoring and continue to keep tabs on.
So, Congressman, you're likely aware that last week the president, as he likes to communicate on his social media, Truth Social platform, he implored defense contractors to get their act together with respect to some of the deliveries of some of the orders from the Department of Defense, and suggested to them, encourage them to discontinue stock buybacks and dividends and to limit executive pay until they got their act together and their stocks sold off. But then the very next day, just thinking about spending and budgeting, he called for an increase in defense spending of some $500 billion. That would be a 50% increase. Is there an appetite, do you think, Congressman, in the House and Senate to increase spending to that level of defense?
You know, I would tell you that I believe that there is an appetite to increase spending. I don't know that we will increase spending to that level. Again, we'll have to see once the president's budget is officially submitted exactly where within the defense budget those increases occur. We do know that there was a big infusion under the reconciliation bill for national defense. We see that as events continue to escalate in the Middle East, continued war in Europe between Russia and Ukraine, concerns and saber rattling in the Indo-Pacific between China and Taiwan. Look, we live in probably, as far as a foreign relations type of scenario, probably one of the more dangerous times since the Cold War. And so I do think that we need to continue to invest in our military, continue to invest in our industrial base, meaning that we have the facilities to manufacture our weapon systems here in the United States, that we're not relying upon any other country. Because, look, one of the reasons our military has been so successful, particularly over the last, say, 80-plus years, is we have a technological advantage over our adversaries. We know that particularly with China that gap is closing, and so we've got to make sure that we are properly investing so that we have the best trained and the best equipped military with the most advanced technology of any nation on the globe. And that is what the president, I think that is why he is wanting to continue to push defense spending. And so while I do think that number will increase, Gerard, I think we're too far out to see exactly what that budgeted amount will be going into FY27.
Yeah, I think I could speak on behalf of a lot of your constituents and just fiscally responsible-minded Americans in general that certainly defense is a core function of government, in my view. And I would agree with you that our technological advantage over the rest of the world is nothing short of staggering. And this operation just completed quite successfully in Venezuela. We've talked about it on the program. A large part of the extraordinary success, besides the great men and women in our armed forces and unbelievable planning, was the technology used in that operation that Venezuela or honestly nobody else has.
Well, that's exactly right. You know, when you combine the technological advantage that we have, the training that our men and women receive, and then the planning that went into that operation. I mean, you saw what could many just be described as almost a flawless operation. I know we had some service members who were injured, but we lost no service members. We lost no equipment in that particular raid. They accomplished the mission. They were on the ground. Everything was carried out in a very timely manner so that as the missiles were striking the air defense systems, we actually had soldiers who were rappelling down onto the grounds to begin the capture and the extraction of Nicolas Maduro. And so clearly goes to show that America, military power, that we are still, I would argue, the most powerful, and that there really is a pretty big gap between our military capabilities and what China can produce. But that gap is narrowing, that gap is closing, and we need to continue to invest in our military, getting back to Ronald Reagan's vision of peace through strength. If we want to stay out of foreign wars, the way to do that is to have the strongest, best-trained military in the world, and that will keep American soldiers from being placed in harm's way.
Yeah, I agree. And honestly, I think this operation in Venezuela sent a strong message to our adversaries, in particular on the global stage, not to mess with us because they're nowhere close to our capability, especially from a use of technology in military operations from that perspective. But you just said something, Congressman, about the spending. You feel confident that we'll get the regular order 12 appropriations bills that fund the discretionary component of spending out of the House?
You know, the bill that we may have problems getting across the finish line, Gerard, would be Homeland Security.
Okay.
And that is only in light of what we saw happen in Minnesota 2 weeks ago or so, roughly 2 weeks ago, where we had an ICE agent involved in a fatal shooting there in Minnesota. That has galvanized a lot of the Democrat opposition to the Homeland Security bill, because that's the bill in which ICE is funded. The Democrats want to put some restrictions on ICE's ability to perform their duties. Republicans are not willing to place those restrictions in the bill, so that will be the most difficult of the bills remaining for us to be able to get off the House floor.
Okay. Can you hang around for another segment, Congressman?
Yes, sir. Would love to.
Okay, let's talk about it, because I want to get your thoughts on what will happen over in the Senate once you guys send those 12 bills over there. As you well know, the threshold is a little higher. We'll get your thoughts on that, and also the possibility I'm hearing about another reconciliation bill this year. We got Congressman Michael Guest on the line. He represents Mississippi's 3rd District, calling in with a report from the nation's capital. Stay with us. We're coming right back in the Element Wealth studio.
From the Seabrook Doctor.
I'm ready. Ready here.
Middays with Gerard Gibert on SuperTalk, Mississippi.
Who draws the crowd and plays so loud, baby? It's the guitar man. Who's gonna steal the show? You know, baby, it's the guitar man. He can make you love, he can make.
Welcome back, everyone. It's Middays from the Element Wealth studio. We've got Congressman Michael Guest calling in from Washington, D.C. on the line. So, Congressman, we get these 12 bills, assuming that the Homeland Security gets passed in the House, and, of course, it gets sent up to the Senate, where a lot of times it's a more controversial issue to get those bills passed, because in general you got to have 60 votes, and there are also some Republicans that sometimes push back on legislation that comes out of the House that Republicans pass. What are your thoughts, and do you have a prediction, a handicap there?
You know, I'll tell you that the 3 bills that we passed last week, the 3 spending bills out of the House, passed with bipartisan support, pretty much overwhelming bipartisan support. There were a handful of members on both sides who voted against the bills for certain reasons, but there was a great deal of momentum behind those bills. So I feel like that with such a large bipartisan support in the House, that it is likely that those bills will get across the finish line in the Senate. The bills that we vote on this week, I'm also led to believe will have some widespread bipartisan support as well, which bodes well for their chances to pass the Senate. And then we'll just have to see, Gerard, that last 4-bill package. Again, it contains bills that generally Democrats are not supportive of defense spending. They're not supportive of spending to secure the border and to protect the homeland. Those bills, again, if they're packaged together in a 4-bill package, they may face some headwinds there in the Senate. But I do feel good, again, about the 3 bills we passed last week and the 2 bills we expect to pass this week. That final package that we'll get on the floor when we're back in session next week may face some challenges once those bills make it over to the Senate. Okay.
Fair enough. And then, of course, they could mark them up and send them back, and you guys would get together and try to sort that out and see what you could come up with, send it to the president's desk. So at this point, do you feel pretty confident that we're not facing a shutdown as we did the last time we ran out of money and had to pass a continuing resolution, but only after a couple of months of the government being shut down? You feel like that we're going to avoid that this go round because we run out of money, right, funding at the end of this month?
Yeah, I do. You know, again, I think the bill that poses the biggest challenge right now is the bill that funds Homeland Security. There may be a possibility that we would see a CR just for that set of agencies that are funded under that spending bill. But I do believe that the other 11 spending bills will all have been passed by both chambers and signed into law by the president. So if we are facing some sort of shutdown, it would be a limited shutdown to agencies that are funded under the Homeland Security Appropriations bill. And again, a way to avoid that, if we can't come to final bill text on that particular spending bill, would be for us to consider a continuing resolution just for Homeland Security.
Okay, fair enough. So I also said in the last segment that it appears that perhaps Republicans are thinking about another reconciliation bill. And
that's right, Reconciliation 2.0.
Yeah, so there, as you know, there's some limitations on that. The parliamentarian has to weigh in. It gets pretty complicated on what all can be passed through the reconciliation process, how many reconciliation bills can be passed during a given period of time. But just doing some research there, Congressman, what I'm seeing is possibly to be included in this bill mainly focuses on something the president's talked about a lot lately, and that's affordability. Knowing the midterms are approaching and that Americans are often vote with their pocketbooks, as the saying goes, but one of those would be to eliminate capital gains tax on the sale of homes, but only to first-time buyers. It's limited in that. And then one is complete repeal of the estate tax. And you know the Democrats, boy, do they ever get all upset about that one. And there's some other things as well, some health care reforms, freezing federal funding for large abortion providers. That really would have to do more with Planned Parenthood, I think, is kind of what the target is there, and some regulatory reform. What are your thoughts about this? Is there a chance that this may happen?
Look, I think we as Republicans would be crazy not to try to pass a second reconciliation bill.
Okay.
I mean, very few times do Republicans have the opportunity to control the House, the Senate, and the White House.
Yeah.
We were able to pass the reconciliation bill last year to provide tax relief to all Americans, to provide additional spending for our military, for border protection. This bill would be more narrowly focused. I think what you're talking about is the plan that August Pfluger and the Republican Study Committee, they have introduced an outline, a framework, if you will, for a second, more narrowly focused reconciliation bill. Again, focused on what you talked about, cost of living, with 3 primary pillars being housing, healthcare, and energy. Mm-hmm. If we are able to move this forward, I think you will continue to see that this will have an impact on those cost of living, those pocketbook issues that you talked about. And look, we all understand, that inflation impacts all of us.
Yeah.
Inflation has dropped to below 3%. I think 2.7 roughly was last that I saw. which still impacts all Americans, but is a far cry from the 9% inflation that we saw under the Biden-Harris administration.
Right.
We've seen some good economic news with, GDP. We see GDP growth looks good. We've seen the deficit, as far as the trade deficit, has narrowed. We see the job market has remained steady. And the fact that I think we're currently around 4.5% unemployment in the United States. And so we've got some good economic numbers, but we also know that the inflation that we saw the last 4 years, as it has compounded, has made it difficult on Americans as they go to the grocery store, as they seek to pay their everyday living expenses. And Republicans must work to try to address that, because that is going to be, I believe, the major issue in the 2026 elections as to who controls the House and which party controls the Senate.
Okay. Well, that makes total sense, and I think you're right that now's kind of the chance. You don't really know what might happen in the midterms. We already have a razor-thin margin in both chambers, but in the House in particular, where often in the midterms, as you know, the party that occupies the White House typically cedes control of the House of Representatives in the midterms, and I think the president is well aware of that history, and he's getting out in front of this and trying to deliver some reforms that he thinks may move the needle in favor of Republicans there. One of the things that he did talked about last week, get your take on this, was to cap interest rates charged by credit card companies, cap them for asking voluntarily for them to do that for a year, and that's received lots of pushback from members of Congress, both houses, and of course folks in industry as well. Do you have some thoughts on that, Congressman?
I think it's a double-edged sword. I think for those people with good credit, that it works in their advantage.
Yeah.
I think for those people who don't have exceptional credit, you'll see that credit card companies will be less likely to issue credit cards. People will be less likely to use that form of payment to be able to purchase goods and services. So I think you've got to be very careful when you look at that. In theory, yes, we would love to see interest rates go down, but when you start having the federal government come in and impose caps, there's the law of unintended consequences. And so what about those people who don't have good credit? They're newly in the job market, or maybe they've made some bad financial decisions and they don't have a good credit score. I think that could lock out a certain segment of the population if we cap those rates. And so I think we have to be very careful. In theory, it sounds great, but again, I think we've got to be careful as we kind of broach that and look at putting those caps in place.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of feels like it's just government price controls, which generally don't really provide ultimately good positive benefit for citizens, and we certainly have opposed that in the past when Joe Biden was in office. This feels like the same thing. I appreciate what the president's trying to do here is just lower the cost of everyday Americans. Got about a minute left. Your thoughts quickly.
Yeah, and look, I think the president is very focused on cost of living. He understands the impact that it's having on all Americans. And you talked just a minute ago about the very narrow majority here in the House. Since we've come back in January, Marjorie Taylor Greene has retired. Doug LaMalfa from California has passed away. And so our majority has decreased by 2 members just since January. And so anything that we do as far as Republicans, we have to have all Republicans united behind that effort, whether it be a reconciliation bill or anything that we're going to pass off the floor because of our very narrow majority. Yeah,
makes total sense. Well, as always, we appreciate you joining us with an update from the nation's capital, Congressman Michael Guest. Appreciate it, Congressman. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Gerard. Good talking to you.
You man. So we're coming right.
Madison Sellers.
It's so awesome!
Middays with Gerard Gibert.
Come on, let's get on with the show!
On SuperTalk, Mississippi.
I got rice cooking in the microwave. Got a 3-day beard I don't plan to shave. And it's a goofy thing, but I just gotta say, hey, I'm a-doing alright. Yeah, I think I'll make me some homemade soup. I'm feeling pretty good, and that's the truth. It's It's neither drink nor drug induced. No, I'm just doing alright. And it's a great day to be alive. I know the sun's still shining when I close my eyes. There's some hard times in the neighborhood, but why can't every day be just this good?
We're back with you in the Element Wealth studio. Go to myelementwealth.com or call 601-957-6006 to let Element Wealth help you find your balance between income growth and guarantees. Another negative day for the markets. The Dow been hopping around, presently down 291 points. The funny money getting up there close to 100,000 now, Rhino, at 97,000 per coin. The NASDAQ, another big sell-off there for the technology industry. It's down 384 points. Crude oil also up now, almost $62. And I've seen the price at the pump trend upward a bit in the last week as well, reflecting that increase in the price per barrel. So, and appreciate Congressman Guest coming on for a couple of segments to provide us with an update on what's going on up there in Washington. This prospect of a reconciliation bill, another one, is very interesting. Repealing the estate tax. I'm all for that. That is interesting. I don't think that has a snowball's chance, as the saying goes, over there in the Senate. Now, this possibly could be a short-term situation where it could pass with a simple majority. I'm not sure Republicans, with their majority, with a simple majority, could or would be inclined to enact the provisions in this proposed reconciliation measure. And something I want to point out about the capital gains on the sale of a home, this is kind of weak in my view, and here's why. Presently, any gain that is recognized on the sale of a primary residence, the first $500,000 of that for a married couple is exempt from federal taxes, capital gains taxes. So if you make $500,000 as a gain, you bought it for $100,000, you sold it for $600,000, your house, you make $500,000 profit gain, that's not subject to income tax under present law. But this would essentially amend current law to make all gains on the sale of a primary residence exempt from personal income tax if you sell it to a first-time home buyer. Now, let's think about that for a second. Already, the $500,000 gain is exempt. I'm just curious how many first-time home buyers out there are buying a house where the gain by the seller would exceed $500,000.
Not many.
These are $2 and $3 million houses. Congratulations to first-time home buyers that are able to do that. And I know what the purpose is to create some churn in the housing market, right? People are sitting on these properties that they know they got a big gain in, and they're hesitant to sell their property because they know it would be subject to tax. But $500,000 is already exempt. So I don't know that that's very useful. And I don't think that addresses the issue of first-time home buyers not being able to afford a house. So I kind of question that one. But it's likely, Rhino, that if you allowed that to apply to all home buyers, that not just first-time home buyers, when they purchase these homes, that probably gets outside of the reconciliation rules with some of the math there. That's my guess on why it's restrictive. And some of it's because they're trying to help first-time home buyers. Now, look, in the states where the cost of real estate is astronomical, around D.C., California, New York, yeah, I can see that. But for those of us here in Mississippi, I just don't feel like a lot of first-time home buyers are buying $750,000 houses. I think you could count those on a couple of hands, maybe, in any given year. And And then some of the regulatory requirements, absolutely. Slashing permitting, environmental, and other requirements for energy production while taxing third-party litigation against those projects. I think that's a good provision. I like that. Certainly eliminating the estate tax. I like that. Of course, the Democrats want to go in the opposite way. They want to make all kinds of reforms to the death tax to make you cough up more money when you die and your assets are passed on to your beneficiaries. So imposing large taxes on foreign nationals who purchase land or real estate in the U.S., I'm down for that. I kind of feel like that maybe that should be more applicable to those who we deem as our adversaries. I know that can be a bit subjective, but some of that's pretty straightforward. We know China is a dang adversary. We know Russia is an adversary. So that's pretty again, straightforward, as I said. And then they want to do some stuff to health care. We're coming right back after Fox News and SuperTalk News with Professor Christopher Green. Your hour of Middays with Gerard Gibert is brought to you by the Mississippi Business Journal. Visit msbusinessjournal.com. Scott Coopwood, publisher and president.
Get ready to go beyond the headlines and join a meaningful conversation with people from around the state. You're listening to Middays with Gerard Gibert here on SuperTalk, Mississippi.
Welcome back, everyone. It's hour 2 of Middays from the Element Wealth Studio on this Hump Day. It's our pleasure to welcome now Professor Christopher Green, Assistant Director, Chase Center for Civics, Culture, and Society at The Ohio State University. Hey, Professor, good to see you, sir. Thanks for coming on.
Good to see you.
All right, so the Supreme Court, man, they've gotten a lot of attention here the last few days. It's quiet for a while. They get back in the building there. You got protesters with signs all over the place. You got justices that are commenting about these cases and getting lots of national attention. You got to say that the top of the list there are the arguments in this blockbuster case concerning transgender sports bans. 2 states in particular where their cases were formed and filed in Idaho, West Virginia. 2 transgender athletes, I believe, that sued the states over their bans. This has made its way all the way up to the Supreme Court. Professor, it appears to me the court is inclined to side with the states here. What are your thoughts?
That seems right. So last year they had a case. So the Scrimetti case, when Tennessee banned cross-gender hormones for young people. Even during that case, they were talking about these athletics cases, and Justice Kavanaugh. In a whole bunch of contexts, he has indicated he's particularly concerned with girls athletics. He's been a coach of his daughter's teams, and he even last year he was thinking, well, if we decide it this way for Tennessee, are we necessarily deciding it, or if we decide against Tennessee? They were thinking a year ago, what are the implications going to be for these athletes, these athletics cases? And there are 2 states that are whose cases are at the Supreme Court, but there's a lot of states, and Justice Kavanaugh is always interested in this. How many states have laws like this? So it's 27, 23. A slight majority have bans like this. There were a bunch of interesting questions about whether it is okay, whether it's consistent either with the Constitution or with Title IX to allow transgender people, so transgender women, men who transition to women, whether it's consistent with Title IX to say they're allowed to participate in women's athletics. And the Trump administration was so we had the states, they were arguing, but the administration was also able to get some of the argument time. And they have taken the position that Title IX actually prohibits this, so requires those 27 states approach to go nationwide because of the statute. But yeah, all things equal, it seems pretty likely for the states to win. I'm always a little bit gun shy, and different of the justices tip their hands to different extents. I think Justice Kavanaugh, very clear. He's like, look, 27 states, we're not going to make a nationwide rule. I think he also would probably disagree with the administration on Title IX. I don't think they're going to say that every state has to have a law like this. But very similar to his approach in the Dobbs case. He's like, we're not constitutionalizing this one way, we're not constitutionalizing the other. It's a state of uncertainty, and you can do as you wish. Justice Gorsuch said a lot this time. He said nothing at all during the Scarmetti argument, but he said a lot here, which he wrote the Bostock case, of course, which extends Title VII to transgender and LGBT plaintiffs. They're saying that that's discrimination because of sex. He is not always, he doesn't come out and just say exactly how he's going to resolve a case. He's got hot and bothered about things like, hey, why didn't you make more of this argument? So West Virginia, they have this Title IX case, and this is a hook, federal funding. So because the federal government gives you money, you have to abide by certain rules. And the court has said in earlier cases that states are not supposed to be surprised by this. So West Virginia at one point said in its brief at the Supreme Court said, well, even if you somehow think that it's 51-49 in favor of saying that Title IX prohibits this, it's not sufficiently clear that we were on notice about it. And Justice Gorsuch thought they should have made a bigger deal about that argument. So it very much kind of law professor-y sort of, why are you emphasizing one argument instead of another? Did you emphasize it at the right time, in the right court? That kind of stuff that federal jurisdiction nerds, which I guess I'm still one of those. I'm doing more undergraduate education, but I'm still a federal jurisdiction nerd. They love that kind of issue.
So, Professor, as you probably know, Justice Kavanaugh said that we can't ignore the harm, the word he used, harm, that transgender inclusive sports policies impose on cisgender women and girls in their sports. So he said that. He got very explicit.
You got bigger guys, people with male-sized muscles, and if you're playing something like lacrosse, playing something, just there's sports where there's more contact, basketball, those kind of sports. Yeah, you can. You don't have to be just talking about boxing or something. Although there is female boxing, and there's been some people who have legitimately been injured because of the strength of their opponents. They get injured fighting with the girls too. Fighting with cisgendered women. But it is there are serious concerns, and he was very open. He said, look, there's a cost to not being able to participate in sports. If you're of your gender identity, there's no question there's a cost, but there's also a cost the other way. And he made very clear he thinks states should have the flexibility to make those decisions.
Well, that's where I was going to go, Professor. Is this another situation where our tradition, our principle of federalism is a question here, that states have the right to make these laws, and when it makes its way to the Supreme Court, just for a legal neophyte like me, that means, well, states, you made a law there that actually crosses the line and infringes on what's in the U.S. Constitution. That's where the Supreme Court's got to get involved and sort that out. That was the essence of the Dobbs case, was it not? And is that what's going on here?
That's right. So you've got a federal system. Broadly speaking, the states make decisions, and it's only in the particular exceptional circumstances that the feds come in. So Title IX, you got this big pot of money, and they say, because you've got this big pot of money, and we're going to spend it, and we're going to put certain conditions. But those conditions are not it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for people in D.C. to be making decisions about what happens in every single part of the country. The 14th Amendment, again, it's part of making a union again after the Civil War. Yeah. We got certain baseline requirements of treating citizens equally. But broadly speaking, you're not going to take every single issue of public policy and constitutionalize it according to what the courts think. That was basically the mistake in Roe v. Wade, and they fixed that mistake, and they're trying to avoid making that mistake again. Justice Kavanaugh, his approach is like very much pragmatic. Like, that was a bad idea. We want to move things to the lowest level. Really, I would have put it, so if I were on the court, I'd be asking different questions. I'd be talking about like the text of the 14th Amendment. Really no discussion at all of the text of the 14th Amendment. It was entirely focused on this framework that the court has made up since 1976. So it's the entire conversation was just about what the court itself has said. And that's worthy of some concern. But I would love them to actually talk about the Constitution as well. They did talk about Title IX, so there was a lot of discussion about the history of the 1970s when they passed this. But really, the 1860s, I think, should get more attention. And really, the idea of citizenship, if you look at that history, that should be the key. To be a citizen is to have an obligation for the government to show solicitude toward your interests. That's what I think the question should be. But the court was not asking that question.
Okay, that makes total sense. So a couple of other profile issues. We're probably going to get caught up with a break here in a second. If you can hang around, we can continue the discussion. But something else, of course, that the courts are dealing with are the issue of the war powers of the president. I mean, this could come up as well, right? We're seeing the president act quite a bit with this recent action in Venezuela. Now the Congress is looking to perhaps rein that in somehow. We got a break right now. We'll get your thoughts on that. On the other side, we got Professor Christopher Green from The Ohio State University on with us on Middays from the Element Wealth Studio.
Deli.
Interrupt this program.
Gerard Gibert.
Here we go.
This is huge.
Huge news.
Huge news. Huge.
You need to listen to this.
Middays with Gerard. SuperTalk, Mississippi.
Welcome back, everyone. It's Middays. We've got Professor Christopher Green on the line with us from The Ohio State University. So, Professor, before we went to break, the president takes pretty significant military action in Venezuela. I think, to a great extent, many Americans support that action, that believe that the country had a really bad person at its helm. Of course, as you know, he captured him, his wife, brings him back to this country. Professor, first I got to tell you, it's surreal to me to see the leader of another nation appear in a United States courtroom. That just seems odd, not something you see every day. But more importantly, it has raised concerns about, well, how far can the president and the executive branch go and the commander-in-chief go with respect to deploying and mobilizing the United States military?
Yeah, so lots of fascinating questions, which really, these sorts of questions, the precise boundary between executive power and legislative power with respect to war, this was an issue from the very beginning of the Republic. So if you remember the great Hamilton musical, a cabinet meeting, cabinet battle number 2 was this conflict between Hamilton and Jefferson, and really Hamilton and Madison, about whether the president alone could terminate a treaty with France. And the president, basically Hamilton said he could, and then Congress ends up approving it. So it kind of moots the question. But Madison said, hey, no. Congress is the one who gets to declare war. So the basic distinction at the founding is Congress is allowed to transition our status as a nation from a state of peace to a state of war. The president is allowed to repel sudden attacks. So Pearl Harbor happens. When bombs start dropping December 7th, we are in a state of war with Japan because the bombs are dropping. Sure. So the president isn't taking us from a state of peace to a state of war. He's just repelling a sudden attack. Whether the president could, without a declaration of war, then go drop bombs on Japan, well, that would be a different question. Okay, here, Venezuela, we have this arrest warrant, which is surprisingly many, many years old. Okay, yeah. So under the first Trump administration, he was indicted. We said, hey, we're trying to pick this fellow up. He happens to be the head of another sovereign country with which we are not really at war. Okay, but when you indict the sovereign head of another country, that's not the action of a friend of a standard sort, right? So there's a question: is this fellow Maduro? To what extent is he Venezuela? Is an action against him an action against Venezuela itself? Well, you can't really. It's hard to be a country without a chief executive. You can try. So there's a lot of questions. One question you can ask is were the activities, so assuming everything in the indictment is true, as all this drug dealing stuff, Manuel Noriega, he was indicted, he was convicted, he was spent time in federal prison, despite having conducted his crimes as president of Panama. Well, same thing with Venezuela. Is all this misbehavior, is that causing Venezuela to be in hostility with the United States, to the extent that the president is merely executing international law, executing our rights as a sovereign not to have an attack placed on us by means of all this drug smuggling. So you might say, well, Maduro was engaged in hostility. Venezuela wasn't. Okay. So we have to have Congress authorize particular things. That's the kind of question that gets raised. And this is exactly the kind of question that was fought in the essays of 1793 and 1794 between Hamilton and Madison, saying, well, not paying back money to King Louis XVI, who's now dead. Well, yeah, we're not going to pay money to a dead man, but forbidding people to be nice to France, is that the kind of thing Washington can go beyond and say before Congress is done? Very, very similar. So what can we do? We invaded their airspace. We did a whole bunch of stuff. We played apparently some wacky, used some high tech stuff to keep them from hearing things. We did this despite the fact that the Venezuelan military was not happy. Is that taking us from a state of peace to a state of hostility with Venezuela in a way that only Congress is allowed to do? Generally speaking, the presidents have done a lot of unconstitutional stuff. I'm not gonna lie to you.
I think the
modern war powers.
The fundamental problem I just comes to mind with that is that's just so subjective. Going from a state of peace to a state of war and a state of peace to hostility. I mean, that could take on numerous definitions that vary widely.
Right. Yeah, so like the TikTok statute, for instance, it said, well, TikTok's owned by China, which is still, by the way, is still in effect, and TikTok is technically illegal. It doesn't say we're at war with China, but it says China is an adversary. Okay. So, what the hell is that?
Exactly.
An adversary. So are we at war with Russia? If you asked somebody in like 1750, when you're putting an embargo on oil exports against a country, well, that's an act. They would say, yeah, you're at war with them because that's an act of war. Our modern understanding allows all these gradations of other kinds of not perfectly friendly actions, short of war. So it really is the modern situation, the way international relations works today, as opposed to the founding, is much greater. So it's not a black and white world, and we kind of have a constitution that presupposes a black and white world of international relations, and the extent to which we're obliged to rebuild that because our constitution says that is a tricky question. But Broadly speaking, I'm almost always saying Congress, it would be better if you did more stuff. If you made it clear that this was fine, that we are, in fact, supporting at least a limited range of actions against Venezuela in order to prevent their chief executive from engaging in drug smuggling.
I think
I think it would be better if our statutes made that clear.
I agree. I think the political reality, before we move on to the next subject, is that if you like whoever the president is and you support him, you want him to have kind of unfettered power. If you don't, you don't. And that just reverses every time we change parties and presidents. So it's hard to get a consensus.
So many of the things that Trump's done, even if I like him, like, I would really like this to be in a statute, even if it means getting less of it, in part because it'll continue existing with a different executive.
All right, quickly, before we go, a couple of minutes, this tariff issue. The president says it'll be catastrophic, if the court rules against his imposition of tariffs. I'm kind of thinking maybe they won't strike them all down, Professor, but allow some to stay and some they'll dispense with. What do you think?
It is possible. Frankly, I disagree with the president on the economics of it. I'm a free trade guy. More production, lower prices is good. Good for America. Good for the rest of the world. There's military. The military implications for sensitive stuff are one thing, but Canada is not invading us. So getting cheaper stuff done in Toronto. We will benefit. We will produce more stuff. He's got negotiations going on. He wants leverage. He's worried that if he doesn't have unfettered ability to have punishments, reprisal type actions, he won't be able to negotiate deals that are as good. That's probably true. That if he had more flexibility, he could make kind of wild first offers first, and negotiate better deals. Catastrophe, I think, is probably too strong. But it's hard to know what they're going to do. They can, there's a bunch of tariffs, and there's various statutory language that that applies to different situations. And there are some mid-range positions available, but the uncertainty of it really is just terrible for investment. You're going to hang back and decide what to do after the Supreme Court decides it. So this is one of the issues where I really do think, as difficult as the issue is, it really would be good for the Supreme Court to act more quickly, just so we can know one way or another, and know what the baseline is with respect to which the president can negotiate. And if the president doesn't like it, he can go to Congress and get an authorization, and he might well get something. But Congress, again, they're the ones who are supposed to be doling out authority explicitly. So making it clear in the statute is almost always a good way, better way to go.
I'm just going to make a final comment. We got to go, but I just feel like that we need to invoke those checks and balances that were originally envisioned in our Constitution and our framing. And we can get out of kilt on that in a hurry, and I don't think that's in the best interest. But I always appreciate you coming on, Christopher. Enjoyed your insights and your analysis. Professor Christopher Green from The Ohio State University. We'll talk to you soon. Thank you, Professor.
Talking to you soon. Take care.
We're coming right back in the Element Wealth studio.
From the Seabrook, Gerard Gibert. He keeps his classified documents right where they belong. Inside a Journey record jacket from the 1980s. Gerard Gibert, SuperTalk, Mississippi.
We are back with you in the Element Well studio. A little Tom Petty. So, taking a look here at the C Spire text line, Mike in Gulfport says, what is free trade when we are getting screwed on the other end? We have to get this fixed quickly and Congress would take forever. But are we, Mike? I mean, what do we mean by getting screwed? And this is something that we should report to you, is that the efforts that the president is employing with these tariffs would it was thought that this would sort of impede China's exports to this country. Here's the truth, just reported. The trade surplus that China has with this country increased with the tariffs in 2025. A record $1.19 trillion. Now, I'm in the camp, honestly, that doesn't think that having a trade deficit or surplus is that huge a deal. And here's what I mean by that, my rationale for that. We buy stuff, Rhino, you know this, from certain small countries that we can't produce here. I can't remember which one of them, Madagascar or something, where we get vanilla as an example. Well, we're not going to have a trade surplus with Madagascar. There ain't no people in the country. But, yeah, we do consume vanilla here as an example. So it's not an apples-to-apples comparison. Now, when you look at a country like China, whose population exceeds ours substantially, what now, Rhino, by 4, perhaps? We've got 340 million. Where are they? $1 billion, $1.1 billion, $2 billion, something like that? So, but they're a whole lot poorer than we are. And so their buying power, the biggest risk and the biggest benefit of propping up trade with respect to this country selling to other countries is that they must convert their currency to American dollar first to make those purchases, and that props up the value of our dollar, which is something a lot of people are concerned about because of the inflation, which devalues our dollar, and that just means your dollar buys more. That's what it means, because they increase the value as it relates to their currency, and thus we can buy more of what they produce. It's the bottom line there. So that drives costs down for our importers who sell to us as retail customers in this country. So there's no doubt that China has not played fairly. And what I mean by that is they manipulate their currency. They lie their rear ends off about everything. And I think for the most part, when you think of the trade problem, generally speaking, would you agree? We think of China as kind of the core of that as far as the other nations in the world. And I appreciate the president putting pressure on a lot of these countries to open up their markets to our goods. I think that all made sense. Didn't really require tariffs. Now, it could be that those are in his back pocket as a negotiating tool. He's a master negotiator. Absolutely. But the fact is, a lot of things about this whole tariff thing is the amount of money coming into the Treasury is not that much, relatively speaking. And I know some people get upset because I tend to minimize $150 billion, which is what it amounts to. It's not that I think $150 billion is not a lot of money. It's just in the scheme and the context of the budget of this country, which is $7.1 trillion. There is this concept known as materiality. It becomes immaterial. And so I'm not. And the other thing that's just fact, reality, reported by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, is that manufacturing jobs decreased in this country last year by 8,000. Now, I think a lot of that's because we just don't need a bunch of people in the factories. So I'm all for domestic manufacturing And I'd love to see more American companies who make stuff in other countries bring that manufacturing back. And I think the president's put a lot of pressure on those companies just by calling them out in the public square. He's really good at that. And I think that has promoted the domestication of lots of manufacturing. But in terms of creating more jobs, it just hasn't. That's just a fact. And that's not, in my view, a bad thing. Is something, Rhino, you and I have talked about numerous times, is this ain't the 70s. Our economy, from a jobs perspective, is not, and really from an overall industrial perspective, it's not driven by manufacturing. Do we need manufacturing? Sure. Do we need stuff to make stuff? Absolutely. But the modern day factory is a data center producing artificial intelligence and cloud services. Those are factories. That's the 21st century factory. And that's driving our economy. It's driving GDP growth, and it's making other companies more productive. And its productivity is the only way to produce wealth and to increase wealth. It's more output per labor minute, per labor hour. And those technologies are making all industries way more efficient. And that's why our GDP is doing real well right now. But the data is clear that China's surplus, the difference between what it exports and imports, increased in spite of tariffs. And the other thing to just bear in mind is that those tariffs are paid by American companies. They're not paid by those countries. It's true that some of those have agreed to absorb some or all of those tariffs. And that's why we haven't seen that embedded in the cost of what we buy that is imported. No doubt about that. But it's still remains to be seen is exactly how effective those policies would be. Mike says, having lived through the free trade NAFTA deal as a retailer, I know we have lost huge numbers of manufacturing jobs. That will continue until we get pricing in line. And I take a different position, Mike. We're not going to create a bunch of manufacturing jobs. I don't care if the factories come back. The factories aren't going to be filled up with a bunch of people. And in fact, if they were, we couldn't afford anything they made because the cost of labor is so high. And companies are, of course, seeking to improve productivity and efficiency, which is what they should be doing. And that, to a great extent, means automating and producing without the need for expensive labor. Now, there are a lot of manufacturing that occurs abroad, in China in particular. Mexico, with respect to NAFTA, is another example where they're still somewhat labor intensive, but it's very inexpensive labor. I remember, Rhino, not so long ago, you looked up like the difference between the average factory auto worker in Mexico versus the U.S. I want to say it was like quadruple or some insane delta between what they're paid here and what they're paid there. Heck, cars are already expensive. And so all the return of manufacturing and the construction of manufacturing plants and factories are not buildings that are going to be filled up with American workers. They're just not. And for decades now, the percentage of manufacturing workers of the overall workforce, last time we looked, Rhino, like 12% or something like that. And it was at its peak in 1979, where it was like 30% of our workforce. And a lot of that's because, think about all the new jobs, new occupations, not just physical jobs, new occupations that have been created as a result of this explosion in technology that's occurred since 1979, jobs that weren't available then, were not even a twinkle in the eye. Futurists say that a child born today will occupy a job that hadn't been invented yet. We don't even know what that looks like. That's just part of the human journey. But it's also a testament to the incredible brain power the good Lord gave us. And it's the innovation that comes from our brains and our heads. And I believe God expects us to leverage those skills and those talents to produce for society. So I see this all as a good thing. But the data's in, and the tariffs didn't really do a lot of damage. The Democrats were totally wrong about that, but it didn't really help a lot either. Coming right back.
Polly Up of Mississippi. Covering the stories that matter most to Mississippians. Gerard Gibert. Middays with Gerard. Super Talk, Mississippi.
We're back with you in the Element Well studio. So something else about the import-export imbalance is keep in mind that a lot of, Rhino, what we export in this country are services. It's not stuff we make. And that's because we have these capabilities. We have advanced as a society so that the vast majority of our workforce, they're service workers. We've come beyond the era where most people work in the more traditional industrial business segments, where, remember, in the 30s, a third of our workers were in agriculture. Now it's like 3%. It was a third of a smaller number, I grant you, but it's 3%. We produce more food and fiber than we can eat and consume. It's one of the reasons that the farmers are struggling. They're so dang good at what they do. And that's a function of the evolution of new farming techniques and tactics and lots of technology and implements and materials, and just all the inputs to the agricultural process have made American farmers way more productive. We struggled to feed our own population when a third of them were involved in feeding our population. Now we have a surplus in excess. We can't consume it all, and it's 3%. And the same is true from a manufacturing perspective. Our manufacturing output continues to increase, but we got fewer people involved in the production. I don't see that as negative. Now, on the C Spire text line, someone says, Andrew from the Woodville area asked the purpose of tariffs during times of George Washington and how it financed America. I think most folks, I agree, Andrew, most folks are aware of that. But, okay, let's talk numbers, though. We had a much smaller population. Our federal government was, for the most part, Rhino, our defense. There wasn't a lot to it beyond that. We're not going to turn that back. If we wanted to, let's say, replace the income tax with tariffs, that would require about 180% tariff. Because our $30 trillion economy, only $4 trillion of it is stuff we import. It's a minor part of our economy, minimal part. So if we imposed 180% tariff, think about that. That would devastate our economy. And guess what? That's what's required on a nominal basis to replace the income tax. But that assumes we'd still import the same value with 180% tariffs on it, and that's not going to happen. You couldn't afford a lot of stuff we buy today that's manufactured abroad inexpensively. So there would be no tariffs. And by the way, it'd be American companies paying those tariffs. So I think there's a place for it. I think the way the president has employed them as a negotiating tactic to straighten out some of the situations where was it, in Europe, they weren't buying certain vehicles, and was it Australia, Rhino, they weren't buying our beef and stuff like that. Yeah, I think that's a problem, and I think the president's addressed that, and he's used tariffs effectively for that purpose. And where China has manipulated our currency, but I guess I was expecting to see that, And I think most people thought after the imposition of these tariffs with China, and that went around the world, right? It started out at this number, and it's part of the negotiating process. I mean, it adjusted and changed quite a bit on both sides. And I think at the end of the day, now the data shows us that China actually sold us more stuff than they did prior to the additional tariffs. So I'm not sure if that's a good or bad thing, but that's the data as we have it today. Yeah, this is a question that comes up a lot. What about a federal sales tax? That way everyone participates. And again, sure, you could eliminate the federal income tax, both the individual and the corporate income tax. And if you replace that with a nationwide sales tax, first, you'd have to impose that on all goods and services, using the numbers I'm about to share with you. And so a lot of things that are now not subject to sales taxes, say in the state of Mississippi, let's take medical services, for example. Those are not taxed, those sorts of professional services. You would have to impose about a 30% sales tax at the federal level. And the big pushback you'd get there, well, first, you'd watch retail sales drop considerably, and that means you'd have to increase the taxes more. So you'd be trying to find an equilibrium there that would be difficult to achieve. But there are a lot of people in this country that would sink even further into poverty. I get it. Everybody wants to say, let's make everybody pay their fair share. I'm for that, man, and have some skin in the game. I get it. Proposals in the past have had these prebates. You're familiar with that, the fair tax. Oh, if you make this, you would be scammed to hell and back. You think you got fraud and scam now? You wait till it applies to every person with this prebate crap. Money would be going all over the place. Coming right back after Fox News and SuperTalk News with the afternoon portion of Middays.
And now, another hour of the talk that keeps Mississippi talking. Middays with Gerard Gibert.
Begin your transition now.
Now on SuperTalk Mississippi.
Welcome back, everyone. It's Middays from the Element Wealth Studio, hour 3 of the program on this
Hump Day.
So the president is out speaking, and he's touting the fact that incomes are rising. That is true. The real wages up by about $1,000. They fell by about $3,000 during the Biden era, although they were trending upward in his last year, but we had already taken such a beating the prior 3 years with the transitory inflation. But no doubt, in the private sector, real wages up and GDP up. Inflation, we still have inflation. We're not facing or experiencing deflation. We don't want that. That's bad. But we are seeing disinflation. Just means that we still have inflation, but it's not rising at the rate that it was certainly during the Biden era. We still got 2.7%. So stuff's still going up. But your wages are going up more, meaning you're ahead of the game. And that's how real wages are calculated. So the president is right to tout that and to promote that as an accomplishment. Tim from Tupelo says, if a male trans goes into a hospital saying they are having a miscarriage and still has their male genitalia, what medical procedure is the doctor doing? Think about that. Yeah, you'll get all kinds of crazy people come out of the woodwork on that one, Tim. Sadly, that will contend and argue that, yeah, there's actually a way. It's nuts, honestly. And all in your head sort of deal. It's all about how you feel. That's what defines your gender, your sex. Nonsense, of course, but it's just still amazing to me that we're having to argue this, that this has made its way up to the Supreme Court, and we're arguing it. Really incredible. And we still have Supreme Court justices who refuse to acknowledge that there are only two genders and cannot remember was it Ketanji Brown Jackson, Rhino, that when asked by Senator Marsha Blackburn to define a woman, and she said, define a woman? Like shocked. And the senator said, well, yeah. And she said she couldn't. She wasn't a biologist or some garbage like that. Oh, my gosh. So let's see. I work in manufacturing, and our goal for the year is to increase automation by 10%. But that's 10%, right, like every year. This is on the C Spire text line. That's typically how that works. Also, on the 901, America helped Brazil raise soybeans, and look at how that helped American farmers. I'm not familiar with that, but, yeah, I get it. Also said, you are eliminating a middle class of manufacturing workers. I don't want Vietnam communist Nike shoes. I hear you, but Nike's not going to build factories in this country that are going to be filled with workers making shoes. That's the point I'm making. We couldn't afford them. They'd be $500 by the time the union gets in and demands this, that, and the other. That's why these companies sought China and Mexico and other countries to make this stuff. It's just the cost associated with it. Should also point out that there are certain things that all came to light during the COVID, such as antibiotics and other goods that we use in our military, relying on China, an adversary for those products. That's a problem. That's a huge problem. And that's been addressed. It's not resolved, but go do some research on that, and I think you'll see that some of the major consulting firms in this country were advising the pharmaceutical industry, McKinsey's one of them, that, hey, you could make this stuff abroad and it would cost you a whole lot less money. You should consider moving manufacturing of those goods over there. Greg says, would they be $500 or less profit for Nike? $500, same profit. And if they priced those in a way that reduced their profit, then they got problems with their shareholders, then they don't have the money to build the factories. I mean, it's the second order thinking again, right? So, no, that's not a solution. There's in my view, there's nothing that's super beneficial about being the manufacturer of Nike shoes. I don't think that's beneficial to society. Again, when you consider that that's not going to be done by American workers. They're not going to hire a bunch of people. And though we are seeing some reshoring of manufacturing, now the data says we shed manufacturing jobs. So we've got more manufacturing, more output, fewer jobs. And that manufacturing is not the only industry where that's occurring. We're seeing it occur in retail. There are new applications, new technologies every day, and some of that, of course, driven by the high cost of labor. When California says, hey, you fast food retailers, you got to pay everybody $25 an hour or whatever the heck it is. That's $50,000 a year to make fries and burgers. Then those companies say, well, that's not economically viable because people won't spend $25 on a hamburger, which is what we need to make a meager profit. Then they start looking for automation to replace those jobs. Already happening, right? We're seeing that big time. Elon Musk says there are 1,000 humanoid robots from his robot business in use today across a multitude of sectors, industrial sectors. He says that figure will go to 10,000 by the end of the year. I believe it. And these aren't static type robots that we're accustomed to of last decade. These are more lifelike, human-like robots. That's why they call them humanoid robots.
I've seen a different tack on why he's making humanoid robots and why Musk has got the Boring Company and why he's been obsessed with electric vehicles and all that. It's all about his end game.
Yeah.
Mars.
Yeah. He said that. He's talked about that. You're exactly right.
So I was just looking at it from the wrong direction of, well, like when they had the humanoid robot serving popcorn at the movie theater. It's like, well, you could have just put arms on the popcorn machine to distribute the bags of popcorn. Like you could have automated that a lot simpler than trying to build a bipedal humanoid robot.
Yeah.
But his reasoning is that you can send a whole army of those to Mars long before you ever send people to Mars to do everything to get it set up.
Yeah. And he's made it very clear that the space frontier itself is in his sights with his rocket companies and everything else he's got going on. And I think humanoid robots will be a part of that. On the C Spire text line, please talk about the massacre that's going on in Iran. Lots of people here probably don't even know about it. Keep the Iranian people in your prayers, please. Yeah, I mean, there's turmoil. There's chaos. There are protests, violent in many cases, across the country. And the president has threatened action. He hasn't done anything yet that I'm aware of. But you know how that works, though. If and when it should happen, we wouldn't have any warning. And that would spoil it, of course. There would be no heads up, and it may be...
Well, it's likely that we're not going to see any overt action, but it's also likely that there's been a whole lot of covert action taking place. Maybe not with any soldiering, but there's definitely been some narrative shaping on the ground in Iran, likely done by three-letter agencies. But in response, instead of imprisoning protesters or allowing for protests, the Ayatollah is just killing thousands.
Yeah.
Going door to door and confiscating any way to communicate with the outside world, including Starlink.
Using their security forces under his control to wield this carnage. And this is, again, it's all rooted in economic collapse. It's rampant inflation, shortage of goods, because those economic systems where there's a small group of people that control everything don't work very well. And that's exactly what's happening there. It's folks are out protesting the regime. Now, this country has imposed tariffs. There are tensions between this country and, honestly, other countries as well in Iran. And it remains to be seen, but there are clashes, there are widespread casualties. I don't know that we are receiving all the information related to that, but I agree we should keep them in our prayers, and it would be fantastic, honestly, if the regime would be overthrown and some semblance, in my view, of Western civilization and Western culture would be restored, and Iran would return to its status and just the way it was as a nation in the 70s, where it looked more like any typical American culture. And I would like to see that happen. Certainly, you've seen photos and videos of Tehran and the major cities. Look like any major American city. The way folks dressed and shopped and moved about, so forth. Coming right back in the Element Wealth studio.
At Fillmore Buick GM.
Interrupt this program.
Gerard Gibert.
Here we go.
This is huge. Huge news. Huge news. Huge. You need to listen to this.
Middays with Gerard. SuperTalk, Mississippi.
Welcome back, everyone, on the C Spire text line, the 910. First time you're number one fan and have never enjoyed any radio program across the nation more than Super Talk. Well, we appreciate that. Thanks for tuning in. I see tariffs as a tool to encourage open and free trade. I believe in competition to strengthen the quality of goods and services available. Agree. I'll just put it this way. how much has your life changed post the tariffs that we're implementing? Because I can't really figure anything out along those lines. And then if the Supreme Court says you can't do that, my guess is it won't change that much either. It's not, again, it's not as significant a component of our economy as I think is widely believed. And I just shared with you the absolute real numbers. It's $4 trillion a year. It's not that that's nothing, but in a $30 trillion economy, it's not that significant. And especially when you consider how that's so widely distributed, right, across the spectrum of products and services. This country has a $1 trillion deficit to China. $1 trillion out of a $30 trillion economy. And again, I think there are national security concerns. That was all exposed in the COVID period, and I would put health in the category of national security. If we can't cure disease and help people and keep them well, that's a national security problem. So that I just kind of have mixed feelings about that. So I think there's a time and place, and I think the president has used it as an effective tool to right some of the disparate situations between and the imbalance between our country and other countries. But as far as a tool to raise money, it misses the mark there. That's the point I'm making.
As long as the government is so over bloated. That's the one thing that I feel like gets left out when people hearken back to the birth of the nation or the Gilded Age when they're discussing tariffs as revenue for the federal government. They're not looking at what did the federal government have to spend their money on at the birth of the nation and during the Gilded Age.
Right.
They didn't have Social Security.
Right.
You didn't have Medicare, Medicaid, SNAP,
right.
TANF, Obama phones. You didn't have any of this stuff. That's just money flowing out the door that can't be covered by tariffs, even in an ideal situation.
Right. So I agree with you. If you
really wanted to transfer from income taxes to tariffs to fund the federal government, there's a whole lot of fat trimming you got to do before that becomes even viable.
Totally agree. But as we talked to the congressman about, man, I don't know that I agree with the president here on increasing the defense budget by $500 billion, 50%. That's going in the wrong direction. Now, if we cut $500 billion elsewhere, I could take a hard look at that, right? And actually cut more than $500 billion elsewhere would be my preference. I also wanted to point out that it's consistent with what we said here on the program is for the first 3 months of the fiscal year, 2026, we generated a $601 billion deficit. I'm looking at the United States Monthly Budget Review from the Congressional Budget Office. That's where I get these figures. I'm not making this up. $143 billion deficit in the month of December alone. So we're not moving in the direction of curbing deficits. Quite the opposite. Our deficits are exploding, despite all the crazy spending that DOJ found and was able to eliminate to the extent possible through executive order. A lot of that also eliminated in the last continuing resolution will be eliminated, but it just doesn't amount to a lot. It's not even enough to offset the natural organic increases in the mandatory side of spending, and that's the fundamental problem, and that nobody will talk about. So $601 billion, that puts us on a $2.4 trillion annual deficit run rate. It was 1.8 last year. So that would be an increase by a third, by 33% in the deficit. So we're going in the wrong direction there, and our interest tab continues to increase substantially as well. We're on a run rate there for about $1.1 trillion of debt interest with no end in sight. So adding $500 billion to defense obviously exacerbates both the deficit and our interest tab. We got to do something better. So Gary and Carrollton said, as long as the U.S. pays people to not work, we'll never be able to compete. Yeah, and I agree with you, Gary, first of all, but I also believe that's grossly overblown to a great extent. Are there people that are completely living off the government largesse that should be in the workforce? Yeah, there are, but I don't think that's a significant a factor as in my view, as is often believed. I would also say that I've always been a fan of eliminating the minimum wage. That a lot of the workers that come across the border that work under the table for less than minimum wage, and the employers take advantage of that. If we eliminated the minimum wage to create more, and that also requires some welfare reform as well. So, hey, you want to eat? You better go out and work. You want more than minimum wage? Okay. If everybody gets into the workforce, there's a chance for that. So, man.
I think there is an underlying truth in there, though, because if you tally up all of the federal and state benefits on average available across the country, you're looking at, on average, if people take advantage of every benefit, six figures, $120,000. The quality of life at $120,000 is greater than it would be if you went and got a $50,000, $60,000 a year job.
Yeah, there's some perversion there that needs to be cleaned up. No doubt about it. And so a lot of that.
There's no drive to even get a decent paying job because, well, you're making six figures sitting on your butt.
Yeah, and a lot of that is driven by, again, our poorly designed and developed systems that allow a lot of that stuff to happen that shouldn't. I've talked a lot about the use of modern technology and artificial intelligence specifically to combat a lot of this waste, fraud, and abuse. And I came across a report this morning from the state of California. 1.2 million people signed up for and received financial aid in their community college system. And the state has decided they're going to utilize modern technology and AI to crack down on that. And they should. It's not that we need more laws. We got plenty of laws, and the laws are reasonable to ensure that only those legitimately qualified and in need receive a lot of these benefits, but they don't get distributed that way. A lot of people who aren't, as we've seen in Minnesota, and gosh, they're just more exposure. This big one in Maine I came across last night. Some sort of transportation services. It's crazy that we even have these kinds of programs. And these people can provide no records showing they ever transported anybody, but they're getting like $6 million a year for crazy stuff like that. And again, there are ways using technology to combat that and to prevent that. So on the C Spire text line, I don't see tariffs as an income producer. However, see a problem if China says, hey, we aren't producing your junk products. What happens then? I'm more concerned about pharmaceuticals and goods we need for our military. I hear you, though. And the protection against that, to this question from the texter, the protection against that is then their economy collapses. Then they got nothing. So they need us to buy their stuff as much as we take advantage of their willingness to make it at a very low cost. Now, Apple is an example of a company who said we're going to reshore and bring. They had a lot of manufacturing, making iPhones over there. The problem is nobody's going to spend $5,000 on an iPhone if it's made here, but Apple has cracked that code and figured out, hey, we can make iPhones here. We can fully automate that manufacturing process such that we're not relying on expensive American labor. Now, if you want to join the ranks of Apple to be involved in software development or design of technology, and all the devices that Apple makes, plenty of opportunities there, and you can make a bunch of money doing that. But you and I were just talking that one of the things that this artificial intelligence data center build-out is exploding is demand for trade labor. I saw a report from someone in Texas that's involved in that says that electricians are getting $400,000 and $500,000 now. Just come work, please. How much do you need, right? Coming right back in the Element Well studio.
From the Seabrook here in the state, Gerard.
Good for America. Good for fans of justice and truth. Good for us.
SuperTalk, Mississippi.
This is what we stand for.
Oh, mama, I can hear you crying. You're so scared and all alone. Hangman is coming down from the gallows, and I don't have very long.
Mo says, Gerard, I can count the number of times I've seen these 5 county development buses during the day with no passengers on them. Yeah, I can't remember what I came across there, Ryan. It's something up in Maine dealing with some sort of crazy transportation services, right? That these just fly-by-night companies that get created apply for these grants and they get this money, and then they come to find out they're not actually doing anything, kind of like the child care, Somalia child care centers in Minnesota. So, yeah, I think there's lots of crazy stuff like that goes on. And it's again, I say it's because we just don't have good processes, good systems to vet and to verify, that they're actually eligible for these programs, and then to verify that the funds are being used as intended, as designed, in accordance with the design of the program. That's why I've actually called for, let's just end all grants until we get our arms around this. Generally, that's where it comes from. It's all grant. All that stuff in Minnesota was grants in the Medicaid program, which I didn't even know existed for child care. I thought Medicaid was supposed to be health insurance for certain categories of truly needy people. That was the original design. And that's evolved way past that, as you pointed out earlier. We've gone from our federal government just being in the defense business, the George Washington era, to
defend
Medicaid.
The borders and settle disputes.
Pretty much it. And now look at it. $7.1 trillion, of which about $1 trillion is that. So
now we're just subsidizing stupidity.
That's true to a great extent. Yeah, Frank from Central Mississippi, that's why we're trillions in debt. I agree. And I have said many times we send our representatives and senators to Washington, those of us certainly that believe in fiscal responsibility, and we implore them to be fiscally responsible, but we also, as in I'm just talking generally among our constituent citizenry, you go up there and send that money home, and you multiply that by 535, and we get $38 trillion in debt. So on the C Spire text line, I don't care if China economy collapses. It's about America. Maybe I'm an isolationist. I was in the military. I don't like to see any state suffer, but America first. I agree. Honestly, I think the world would be better off if China would face collapse. I don't want to see harm to a billion people that had nothing to do with this. They want what we have, honestly, but they're being suppressed by the threat of death. That's the way that system works. What we'd like to see, there could be a good and a bad part of this. The good part is, why don't you embrace freedom and eschew the communist system you have in place? Abandon that. Replace it with freedom and a capitalistic system. The bad news is that if they did that, they'd be stiff competition for this country. But I think the world overall, including us, would be better off if we didn't have to constantly deal with that threat. And not to mention the human suffering. They are human beings. The human suffering inflicted on their population by greedy communists.
I mean, I'm all for everybody being as free as possible, but playing devil's advocate a bit here, with the Chinese cultural norm of if I can get away with it, that's on you. having nothing really to do with communism, if you enact that mentality in a capitalistic free market society with 1 billion people, it's more than just stiff competition. It's bad news for us.
In what way?
From the standpoint of their culture is one of, if I can get over on you, that's on you.
Yeah.
I have no reason to do anything in good faith.
You're right. That's how they operate. That's embedded in their culture.
And
that's a problem.
Little or nothing to do with their communist governance.
You're right.
It's their culture.
Generational legacy of that, right? Ingrained. I agree with you. That's a problem. And that's why you'd have to have some way to arbitrate that, essentially. But, yeah, they are not trustworthy. They justify deceit and duplicity and lying. On the C Spire text line, how many bonds does China own? Yeah, they own $700 billion of the total $38 trillion. Peanuts at the end of the day. It's widely believed, even by people in Congress that are wrong about this, that we generally owe China all this debt. We don't. Japan actually owns more of our debt than China at about $1 trillion. We owe ourselves. The vast majority of our debt is owed to ourselves. Institutional investors, individual holders, banks, corporations, etc., that all have United States Treasury securities. Let's see, I understand that modern factories will require very little human input, but at present, people in third world countries are cheaper than robots. Not actually true. Not actually true. Short term, there could be some costs associated with that, but long term, definitely not true. And keep this in mind, in accordance with the Working Families Tax Cut, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, investment in new factories immediately expensed for federal tax purposes. So that makes the investment in all that infrastructure to create a factory actually a lot more affordable than it was prior to that provision. You don't get that same tax treatment for hiring people. Just to put it in perspective. I contend it has everything to do with communism because they're a godless society. It could be right.
It could be a contributing factor, but that mindset, that cultural norm, was documented long before China became a communist country.
Yeah. On the C Spire text line, CC in Senatobia, I think it's safe to say that nearly $40 trillion is debt, CC, not deficit, will never get paid. It's like a growing fungus that there's no cure for. Totally agree. We'll never pay a dime on it, ever, in my view. So what are the consequences for that? Inflation. So how do we mitigate that? We have to grow the economy because it comes down more to, and what causes inflation is it's more a function of the percentage that debt represents of our GDP. And if we can keep growing our GDP and keep those more in line, then the less impact that has on the value, the downward pressure on the value of the dollar. That's why it's important to embrace all of this technology that will enable us to grow our nation's economy. We're already seeing that. It's the reason why we're producing these staggering 4% GDP growth. We got some of the Fed governors saying we could hit 6% this year. Well, all the investment is in that sector. Majority of it is. It's the driver of the GDP growth. Lisa from Brandon says, our system needs to be a bridge to financial independence rather than a cliff you fall off of when you reach a certain income level. I completely agree, Lisa. And in fact, Rhino, a lot of these programs were originally designed as kind of a short-term fix, aid to people that were within certain circumstances of their jobs, of their labor, of their income-producing endeavors. If you look at the Medicaid program now as an example, that originally was designed for the blind, the disabled. Clearly, it's more difficult for them to produce income for themselves, children in low-income homes. And I know this may sound harsh, but, this problem we have in this country that I think has caused a lot of this welfare, the explosion of welfare and the burden on society is because people go out and have babies when they really aren't in a financial position to afford it, and they rely on the federal government to fill that gap. And we're a humane society. We're not going to let children suffer. But that's the cycle we've kind of built that's certainly causing problems. Alan in the Delta says, come to the Delta. We have lots of living off the government. Well aware. It's the poorest one, if not the poorest region of the country, certainly in the state. And their population continues to decline as well. Nobody's moving into the Delta for the most part. Natural attrition, moving out. But we got to do some work to bring some more industry in there. Mo says there's a part of China where their ancestors are believed to be captured Roman soldiers. Wow. Hard to tell them apart from Westerners. Did not know that. They have turned having babies into a lucrative business. Look at Benny's district. And that's where I have concerns about kind of expanding all these various credits and homestead exemption and additional exemptions for car tags in the state of Mississippi just because of kids. I'm not sure that that's effective policy. You need to be able to afford children, honestly, and not rely on the government and tax breaks to make that work. Coming right back, final segment.
Hi, this is covering the stories that matter most to Mississippians. Gerard Gibert, Middays with Gerard, SuperTalk, Mississippi.
2, 3, 4.
We're back with you in the Element Wealth studio on the C Spire text line, the 901. I love the show, but I don't like NAFTA and any kind of trade deficit with China. I'm not a big fan of NAFTA either, and I certainly don't want to give that impression. But the deficit with China, the only point I'm making here is that the tariffs didn't cure that. That the actual trade imbalance with China increased. That's the official data. So the tariffs didn't cure that. And
because
again,
for certain products, the tariffs really didn't make a hill of beans difference. Like I was telling you during one of the breaks, T-shirts.
Yeah.
T-shirts are a great analogy because just about everybody listening has purchased a T-shirt at one point or time, and in your head, you have a pretty good idea of what the most amount of money you would spend on a T-shirt would be. Well, you can buy made in America, 100% cotton, T-shirt blanks. The cheapest I've ever seen, and this was pre-COVID, was $12. I just tried to find them, and the cheapest I could find was $15. The average was about $16 or $17, up to $20 for a blank. You then got to put something on it. For comparison, the same exact quality T-shirt from China is going to cost you less than $1.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you're in the business of trying to sell some T-shirts, which one are you going to pick? You can make an ideological stance and say, I'm buying American. Well, if you spend $15, let's just say 15 for a nice round number, you spend $15 on that T-shirt just for the blank. What do you got to charge to make any money?
Yeah. So
you could put a 500% tariff on T-shirts from China. It would not impact that business.
Yeah. So the idea was by imposing these tariffs that the theory was, well, this would make the price of imported goods rise to the point where Americans would select American-made products because they'd be priced more competitively. That didn't happen. And a lot of that's because we don't make a lot of the same stuff. There's not overlap. There's not competition for the same good from American domestic manufacturers and Chinese. So then the thought is, okay, well, this would encourage, because there would be a decrease in imports, American companies who make stuff in China would move their operations to this country and domesticate manufacturing. That didn't happen. To a great extent, the trade imbalance exists because we're just a lot richer as a society than China. We have more buying power than they do. So we either got to get poorer or they got to get richer to address this trade imbalance. But I think there are other incentives, and I totally agree with the One Big Beautiful Bill Act that included this immediate expensing of investment in a factory. I think that's a fantastic way to promote and encourage construction of factories in this country because you get to write it all off that year. And that is happening. That has, in fact, we've seen some manufacturers say, yeah, because of that policy, we're going to build here in the U.S. as opposed to overseas. And so I like that. And we haven't really felt the full effects of all that just yet in a positive way. So I think all that's coming. But fact is, we didn't solve the deficit, if that's even a problem. I'm not convinced that's actually a problem just because we import more than they buy from us. China's cutting costs to offset prices. My dad spent his military career fighting Chinese Vietnam and would roll over in his grave if I brought a Vietnam-made Nike. I get it, and that's certainly your prerogative, but
nobody's forcing you to buy Nikes.
That's right, and they're options. And I just think most people are trying to be cost conscious in operating their household and don't really think a lot about that. And I'm not being critical of them whatsoever. I just don't think that's practical. And I don't think most consumers really give that a great deal of consideration. I just don't. Now, I can tell you, my wife's father, longtime employee of a General Motors automobile dealership, and in our household, it's just GM, right? I mean, it's just because of her father. We wouldn't think about a non-GM vehicle among my family. But that's more of a family thing. That's an example of loyalty, based on that. That's neither here nor there. Yeah, Paula Meridian says, isn't Vietnam an ally now? It is, and that's also, as you know, Rhino, a backdoor that lots of the American manufacturers are using to get their goods exempt from the Chinese imposed tariff. So that's why it's just so hard to make government policy, right, that influences behavior, human behavior like that. It tends to kind of fall apart at the end of the day. I didn't get to it today. Cece says, I was in the concrete business for a long time, and it was amazing how many people did not know the difference between cement and concrete. I would be one of those, Cece, and I apologize for Cece. I wasn't trying to kind of be critical of him for conflating debt and deficit. I pointed out, Rhino, as you know, there are people in Congress that don't know the difference, and they should. That's the difference, right? Not the average citizen. The school choice thing is going to heat up big time tomorrow. We're going to dig into that a lot tomorrow. Until then, stay safe and God bless everyone.
A SuperTalk Mississippi media production.